engagement earlier today, and I had asked Councillor, the chairman, Councillor McLaughlin, if he would chair this meeting, and I am happy to propose that he would chair that for me, please.
I'll second that, Chair.
Someone to second that.
So Councillor McGrath has just seconded that, Councillor Rainey.
Okay.
Thank you,
All
Councillor Rainey.
agreed. Yeah. And thank you, Councillor McLaughlin, until you're better paid.
Yes, thank you, Alan. So, have we any apologies other than that we're aware of?
So, Chair, could I just record apologies for Alan Mitchell, please?
Lovely, thank you. Okay. Next, declarations. We've signed the minutes of the previous meeting. Obviously, that will be done at some stage.
Yes.
And then we have item 3 is declarations of interest.
Yeah.
And silence I'll take as golden. Next we go on, and item 4 is the any other business, or not any other matters arising out of the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of February. So
All good.
page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, and that's the minutes covered, unless you've anything else you need.
No, Chair, I was just going to come in on on page 4 in relation to the recommendation around writing to Fibrus, and just to note for members, you'll be aware that we had our meeting with Fibrus back at the start of April, following correspondence to them in relation to the storm. So that would address that particular point there on page 4 in terms of the recommendation.
Okay. Thank you. Do we need to note that or anything, Sinead, or it was sort of dealt with in another committee anyway?
It was, and the recommendation was on the basis that we would write to him if it wasn't being action through other council correspondence, and that had been action. So I think we can note it for the purposes of this meeting, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We need a proposer and seconder for that.
Chair.
Seamus, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to propose. I'm down as not been at the last meeting. Now, so I'm not trying to make any issue of it, but I can't remember missing the last meeting, but I suppose that should have been done in accuracy, but I probably did miss it, but can anyone just clarify for sure whether that's correct or not? For I genuinely can't remember missing it, but then unless I completely forgot about it, and it's maybe a blank in my memory.
I can check from the previous meeting recording, Councillor Green, and then if it needs to be amended, then I'll go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Sinead.
I think that was Kira, actually.
Yeah. Thanks, Kira.
Oh, sorry.
And it's not as if you wouldn't have said anything, Seamus.
I say nothing, John.
Yeah. Okay, so next we're going to item 5, which is to the report on resource allocation, water infrastructure and roads infrastructure update. So that's paper A. So
Thank you, Chair. So members, paper A then, this is a paper in relation to resource allocation, so both water infrastructure and road infrastructure. So members will be aware the objective in terms of the committee strategic work plan includes a dedicated work stream around resource allocation, really with the objective of it in securing a fair share of central government and arm's length body expenditure for Manoma District. So the focus of that work really has been around roads expenditure and water infrastructure. And this paper then really builds on a work stream that has previously been worked on, and really providing then members with an update on the DFI, Northern Ireland Road Network condition stats for 23-24, and also providing then an overview of the NI water prioritisation matrix. And the purpose really is then to provide the information so that it really is an evidence base for the council in discussion going forward with both of those particular bodies and organisations. So if I look very firstly then just members at section 2 of the paper, so section 2.1. So if I just look at the roads infrastructure surface defects instructed, as they're referred to, and we've just provided a clarification of what that actually is. So that's where road surfaces or issues are identified during the inspections by DFI engineers. They're recorded and then prioritised for repair based on the urgency and the risk to public safety. So members will note in the paper that between 1920 and 23-24, the number of surface defects instructed in Fermanagh initially declined, falling from just over 11,000 in the year 1920 to a low of just over 8,000 in the year 22-23. However, it's just important to note that this trend then reversed sharply in the 23-24 year with just over 12,500 defects instructed, so 12,618, and that's the highest level in the 5-year period, and a 53% increase from the previous year. So despite the increase, I think it's important to note, members, just in the paper there, that the rate of surface defects instructed per kilometre in Fermanagh and Omagh has consistently remained low in the Northern Ireland Local Government District average. So in 23-24, the figure was 3.2 defects per kilometre in Fermanagh and Omagh, compared with 4.2 defects per kilometre across Northern Ireland. So over the 5-year period, Fermanagh and Omagh has recorded 1 to 1.9 fewer defects per kilometre than the Northern Ireland Local Government District average year. So it's just noting that that's placing it consistently among the lowest of all the council areas. And then moving on to the next section of the paper, looking specifically then at surface defects repaired. So the surface defects repaired are where the surface issues have been both identified and then physically repaired within the financial year. So members, just to note then at paragraph 2.2.2, in the year 1920 to 23-24, the number of surface defects repaired in Fermanagh and Omagh showed a general decline from 8,949 in the year 1920 to a low of just under 7,500 in 22-23. But notably then this downward trend reversed significantly in 23-24 when the repairs rose sharply to 11,736, and that represented the highest level in that 5-year period and a 58% increase from the previous year. So similar, I suppose, to the surface defects instructed, despite the increase, the rate of surface defects repaired per kilometre in Fermanagh and Omagh has consistently remained below the average, and in 23-24, the figure was 2.9 repairs kilometre for Fermanagh and Omagh district compared to the Northern Ireland average, which is 3.8. And notably then over the 5-year period, Fermanagh and Omagh has recorded between 0.9 and 1.4 fewer repairs per kilometre than the average, placing it amongst the lowest of all the council areas. And then looking, I suppose, just moving on to road infrastructure in terms of road condition. So road condition refers really to the structural and surface state of the roads assessed by the Department for Infrastructure to guide maintenance. So pulling out, I suppose, a number of key points from this section of the report. So A-class roads in Fermanagh and Omagh saw the percentages classified as being in good condition increased from 81.2% in 1920 to 85% in 22-23, before then dipping slightly to 82.4% in the 23-24 year. And then if we look at the B-class roads in the district, that saw a steady increase in the proportion assessed as good condition, arising from 69, almost 60, almost 70% in 1920 to 73.1 in 23-24. And then looking at our C-class roads in the district, that showed a more modest upward trend in good condition, and that increased from just under 60%, so 57.8% in 1920 to 60.2 in 23-24. And members, then if we move on just to look at the water infrastructure section of the paper, so again, members will be aware that the Rural Affairs Strategic Work Plan and Planning Committee both identified water and wastewater infrastructure really as we know, a critical constraint in the district, with the implications for regional equity and obviously for future development. So the information provided by NI Water and presented to the subcommittee in October 2024 noted that the district was allocated 27.24 million, or just 2.25% of the total Northern Ireland investment under PC21, despite FODC accounting for 6.1% of the population in Northern Ireland. As we know, engagement with NI Water have confirmed that the infrastructure investment decisions are based on a model of need that prioritises capacity shortfall and environmental risk. So council officers sought to gain additional detail from NI Water regarding their prioritisation matrix model, as they refer to it, and they've confirmed that they do not have a prioritisation model, but refer to it as a process and a methodology interchangeably in their response to us. And the information provided is really based on the approach taken for the PC21 final determination. And as you'll note there in the report, members, it's understood from this correspondence that the process of determining investment prioritises in the PC27 period process will be evidence-based and broadly in line with the approach taken in the PC21. And members, then just over the page on the paper, then if we note the prioritisation model is centred on compliance risk and was developed through consultation with key regulatory stakeholders, as we've set out in the paper. And the process utilises, as we've referred to, internal records and data sets, and that includes past infrastructure or water quality failures, and also includes issues around failure risk, the future risk of that, pollution incidents, enforcement history, current capacity shortfalls, and then the size of the population served. And just to note then, it's noted that NI Water has a provision of clean, safe drinking water, base maintenance of existing assets and business running costs, and that when funding becomes constrained, as it has been for them and as they've communicated to us over a long period, that investment in sewage and wastewater capacity compliance, it suffers first. So I suppose just in conclusion then, and next steps, members, from the paper, it's fair to conclude that from the analysis of both the road network's conditions and the conditions that the road network in the district receives comparatively lower levels of defect identification and repair, and that this is a consistent trend over the past 5 years. However, as we stated in the paper, the reasons for this are unknown. I think it's also fair to conclude, as we said in the paper, that the condition of A, roads in the district is comparatively better than the Northern Ireland average, but that B and C roads are not in a good condition. And we've noted there the presence of U roads and the data is also a gap, which is particularly prevalent, obviously, in our district. The information regarding NI Water's prioritisation process does outline a robust process with a lot of regulatory input and oversight. And then, as we've noted in the paper, further information has been sought from NI, Northern Ireland Environment Agency, regarding pollution incidents arising from NI Water in the district, and that information will then be presented at a future subcommittee. So in terms of the recommendations of the paper then, members, it's recommended that the subcommittee notes the update on roads and water infrastructure, and just to note then that the detailed appendices are set out at Appendix 1 and 2.
Thank you, Sinead. Does anybody want to come in on that?
Yeah, I have my hand up, John.
Yeah, go ahead, Seamus.
Yeah, I suppose, Sinead, can you clarify, see on the surface defects repaired per kilometre, yes, from 2019 to 2024, we'll say, for instance, in 2022-23, Fermanagh Omagh had 1.9 repaired, whereas NI average was 3.3. So am I right in stating there that basically is that there's a 33% more repairs done in other parts of NI than on average than in Fermanagh and Omagh? And it's even worse than that if they are putting down that we have less defects, that would increase. Now, I would question that we have less defects in the previous one, because I know when they come out and see, I don't know whether there's a policy in this area and it's not a policy in other areas. But in the Fermanagh and Omagh area, they could mark a pothole and leave a pothole beside it unmarked. Now, I don't know whether that happens in Antrim or Down or Bangor or wherever. So it's almost impossible to know whether that's accurate or not, because if they are not marking defects and registering them, of course ours is going to come back as having less defects. Not for 1 second for someone, and I'm sure every other councillor that's here and every other officer that's here thinks for 1 second that our roads in Fermanagh and Omagh has less defects than roads in any of the other council areas. I would find that impossible to believe. But just on the 33% on average, less being fixed, would I be correct in that?
I suppose, Chair, if you're happy for me to come in on that, I suppose
One ahead, Sinead, yeah.
what I would need to do is probably look back at the data that's provided to us, councillor. But I suppose it's just to take us back to how they've described both of these things. So the surface defects, they have described that as being surface defects instructed or road surface issues identified during inspections by the DFI engineers, recorded and then prioritised for repair. Based on what they've referred to as urgency and risk to public safety. And then if we go to 2.21, the surface defects repaired are road surface issues that have been both identified and physically repaired within the financial year. And there's just that note there that these defects may have been reported in a previous year, but are only counted once the repair is completed. So I suppose that's just an important piece of it, Mr. Green. But I would be happy to, if you're content, Chair, I'd be happy to look into that in further detail and come back on that.
And could I just suggest one other thing too, Sinead, on it, is that there's a lot more U-class roads and C-class roads which be inspected only, I think, is maybe once every 6 months. So in other council areas that hasn't, and it is a fact that we have more of them C-class and U-class roads. So the fact that they're only being inspected once every 6 months surely also spews the statistics on that. Would I be right on that as well?
So that would, yes, the fact that we actually have more of those type of roads, and other districts may have less. But what I'm happy to do, Chair, is to take away those questions and we can look at the raw data, if you want to call it, in more detail, and then come back in response to those specific questions.
Yeah, and just finally on the water, on the PC21, is something that I bring up on a very regular basis. I don't know where they've got the 2.25 or the expenditure, because in the paper that they presented to us in council, it was 0.6%. And then when I further questioned them to break it down into Fermanagh and Omagh, Fermanagh was actually getting 0.2% of the entire budget as a county. So where they have got it up to 2.25%, I have no idea because I don't see any major works happening or anything. So that figure also, I think, should be questioned as well, because it's as bad as it is. I think the actual figure is a lot worse.
Chair, I'm happy to take that query away as well, and we can look at that and back specifically on it if you're content.
Yeah. So, are you happy to propose noting, Seamus, along with all your?
Yeah, that's no bother. I see Alan has his hand up there.
No,
as
I'm
well.
going to let Alan right.
And I might have a proposal at the end of this as well, John, so I might be wondering again if you let me.
No, we'll not fall out about that. Alan, do you want to come in now?
Well, thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to second it for you. But as well as that, I want to agree entirely with the statements of Councillor Green in relation to the road. I wanted to ask Sinead, are all the roads inspected, or how do they arrive at these statistics? where I have a notion that looking at the roads in West Tyrone, particularly the B and the C class roads, unbelievable altogether. I have no idea where these inspections are carried out, or is it, as Seamus has already said, you know, that half-yearly inspection? Sure, that's ridiculous altogether to imagine that would be an accurate figure. I would question it altogether, and I would say that if this was looked at on a more regular basis, that it would be much higher, because the roads that I have in mind and as I can visualize, unbelievable. I'm not sure that even. I asked the question once about if a road is inspected, I'm talking about a C-class road, is inspected and receives the yellow paint and doesn't receive the upgrade or to the potholes or whatever it needs, and it comes along and the paint goes on again, and they said yes, that could happen, and that it would certainly be repaired in the second round. So I believe that their whole statistics is terribly inaccurate. The question that I'm asking again is how do they derive at picking up these statistics?
So,
Yeah.
Chair, if
I
you're
suppose
content for me to
Yeah.
if you're content for me to come in on that, I was just going to say I think that's a question we will have to go back and ask, as I've understood it, Councillor Rainey, we're wanting to know, I mean, are all roads inspected, and it's really the frequency with which the inspections are carried out then that is what's the baseline for the data that we have. And I'm happy to take that question away and come back on it.
And some of the big potholes, I mean, there's one beside me, and it used to be two potholes, but they've now co-joined, and it's just one big large one. So statistically, that was two potholes, but now it's just one. But that's a one for another day. Seamus, did you want to come back in again?
Yeah, I suppose, and maybe I should leave this near to the end of the thing, but when you've let me in now, John, I'll mention it. I suppose all these statistics and that, I don't know, I suppose the Rural Affairs Committee now is going, it must be 2 years now at least up and running, and our purpose maybe was to at one stage to put a paper together to bring up to Stormont and present it. And I'm wondering, we have a lot of statistics, and I know that when government bodies provide these statistics, they're almost impossible to read, because as Sinead said there, what is the baseline? What are they doing it on? If a road's been inspected every 6 months, like, you know, how can you judge statistics on that if on U class and C class roads? All of these things be hard to put into the paper, but I think personally, I think all of them things need to be put into the paper now soon, and put into the paper what we see as the worst case scenario, and let them then justify it, rather than us running around trying to clarify what this stat, what that stat, what the other stat means. If we put it in, what I said there is at 33% we are getting less defects fixed. That's a stat. We can bounce that stat back at them and let them justify it and come up with a reason why, because we are forever trying to get our heads around their stats, if you know what I mean. So if there was a paper put together, for instance, PC21, 0.2% for Fermanagh, 0.6% for Fermanagh and Omagh, that was in their own presentation to us. We should go with that stat in the paper, not the 2.25 that they have suddenly appeared with now. Where did it come out of? You know, and all of them, the Lexus Sport NI, where we are getting the crumbs. Is it 3% of the total budget that we're being provided? The Invest NI funding, where we're getting peanuts again, like 25p per capita compared to 250 in Belfast. I think it's time that we try and get a paper put together now. We've probably all the stats we need. Alan Mitchell did about access to services. How slow or fast you can get from Anna or rural Oma to a GP service or to a hospital appointment or whatever. All of them things I think is there, but we need to put the worst case scenario in them of the figures that we see, and let them justify it. Let them come back and say, because them's the stats they have give us. If we work them out, 33% less road defects been fixed. That's a stat. Let them argue that that's not correct, because I think that would even be underplaying the actual reality. But what I'm saying is, I would propose that hopefully before that, and I'm not putting too much of a thing on it, but before the end of this year, I think we should be going to Stormont with a paper. It's time to do it. I think it's past time that we did it. So that's
Okay.
my proposal.
Okay, Seamus.
I'll second that, John.
Okay, thank you, Bernard. That's even better. Save me. And I think we're all happy with that. I'm not even going to ask. I think I think you're right, Seamus. That's where we had hoped this committee would go. That we similar to the Agricultural Committee and maybe go up to give evidence.
Happy with that.
Yeah. Okay. If everybody's happy, then we'll move on to item 6.
Okay.
Is that you again, Sinead? Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Okay, so this paper is around trajectories of deprivation in the UK. So as we know, members, previously the committee examined the issue of deprivation, and this was in the context of the Council's belief that the Northern Ireland multiple deprivation measure, as we see it, underrepresents rural deprivation. So this work stream included a presentation from the Rural Community Network, and then an informal meeting with senior officials within the Northern Ireland Statistics and Research Agency. And at the time, which was September 2023, the senior NISRA officials stated that there were no plans for an update on the Northern Ireland multiple deprivation measure. And to the best of officers' knowledge, that continues to remain the case. So at that time, then there were 3 project research strands. So there was deprivation trajectories, spatial scales of deprivation, and then also deprivation across the UK. And the project, as we've said, there utilised data from the NIMDP measure and the UK deprivation indices, and then the dimensions of deprivation data sets from the census of 2021. So the purpose of this paper then really is to introduce this research to members, noting the potential follow-on work that should advance the issues of deprivation at a small scale to benefit of the measurement of rural deprivation. And then members, just to note that a short briefing on the project compiled by the research team then is actually appended to Appendix 1 of this report. So I suppose just to pull out some key issues then, the research used the census statistics to create a UK-wide deprivation index. And this covered 3 domains of employment, educational, health, and then an overall deprivation index. And as you'll see at paragraph 2.1 of the paper, the findings from the UK deprivation index are that the levels of deprivation in Northern Ireland are consistently high compared to other nations in the UK, with health deprivation notably high in Northern Ireland, and local government districts within NI feature in the top decile across the index and domains. However, the Fermanagh and Omagh district does not feature in that top decile. The research undertook analysis to provide an overview of deprivation trajectories And the rationale for this is that funding allocations are typically based on data from a single time point, and the absence of a measurement deprivation over time then really makes it difficult to evaluate the success of interventions, or indeed to infer what type of interventions might be successful in an area based on long-term data. And the key recommendation from this strand of the research is that policy design should not only be informed by the most up-to-date deprivation statistics, but really should reflect an area's deprivation trajectory over the short, medium and long term. The outputs from the research strand include local government district profiles, and the profile then for Fermanagh and Omagh district then is appended, members, at Appendix 2. And then if we note just the headlines within the Fermanagh deprivation trajectory profile, suggest most areas within the district fall in the middle categories in the deprivation trajectory, but there have been increases at both ends of the deprivation spectrum over time. And then just to note, members of paragraph 2.6, then the recommendations from the research regarding making choices about the deprivation measurement are the use of data for the smallest geographical zones possible, where relevant, use a UK-wide perspective, that the trajectory of deprivation is important for tackling spatial inequalities and access change over time where possible, and then especially in rural settings that you use the grid square data if available. And those recommendations are all to policymakers and people who have an interest in or use of the deprivation data. Members, you'll note at 2.10 of the paper then we said the research team are keen to engage with those who use deprivation data. Council officers have been in ongoing engagement with the research team to get a better understanding of the implications, with a particular focus on the development use of the grid square product. And we've just noted there then, members, that given the importance of this research, its evolving nature and the rich analysis available to the council, and obviously the long-standing interest in the council has in the deprivation measurement, that it might be worth inviting Professor Christopher Lloyd and the research team to actually brief members. So in terms of recommendation then, members, I'm saying that it's recommended the subcommittee notes the trajectories and deprivation update and agrees to invite Professor Chris Lloyd and the research team to present the research to members.
Okay. So, Seamus?
Yeah, thanks for that, Sinead. I suppose to present to members, I would maybe suggest that we, when you say members, is it to members of the council or to members of the subcommittee? Because I would suggest we broaden it out from the subcommittee, because there's a lot of people, councillors that's not on this, that has raised this issue numerous times about how the measure deprivation. And if you look at that chart there that they have given, like, it's nearly all cities. It's big built up areas. They have taken they don't take anything into account for rural access, the lack of access to services, rural isolation. That isn't marked very highly, if at all, on how the measured. And as far as I remember, when Alan originally put this, once you're in this, it's almost impossible ever to be moved out of it. There's no scale to show that Derry and Strabane has improved over the last 5 years. Just Derry and Strabane are in it for ever, it would seem. So I think to meet the every member that wants to meet them would be a good idea. So I would propose that. I think the whole thing around deprivation is the way the collected is flawed. I believe Alan Mitchell had looked at how they do it in the south, and as far as I remember, there was it seemed to be more of a realistic approach, because they did look back on how things was progressing and was any measures actually helping, all that type of thing. So I think it would be good for us all to get a chance, anyone that wants to meet them, to do it. So I would propose that, Sinead, if that was possible.
Okay.
Thank you, Seamus. Alan, are you looking in there?
No, I'm happy to second that indeed, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Cheers. We heard the proposed and seconded to Seamus. I think that's a good idea that we do go the full council. I mean, there's lots of people have lots of questions on this topic, and we've seen that in the past. So I think we're all in agreement.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you.
Chair, if you don't mind me just coming in just to clarify, so we're content that we're noting just the paper, and the proposal is then just a slight amendment to what we've recommended there, which is to present to the all members.
Yes.
Yeah, that's okay.
Thank you very much, Sinead. So item 7. We're doing well.
Thank you, Chair. So this paper then is looking at the DAERA Key Rural Issues 2024 publication. So this is really around the DAERA publication. So DAERA, Department of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, publish a document called Key Rural Issues on an annual basis. And the Key Rural Issues publication really aims to provide robust evidence base to inform the future direction of policy in Northern Ireland. And we've noted just in the report that there's limited new data within the publication, with the aim to provide a compendium of data from the urban-rural perspective to highlight urban-rural differences and disparities across the range of indicators. So the Key Rural Issues document is a key document, as we've said, it's underpinning the Rural Affairs Subcommittee, and it sets the context for the work plan. So the purpose of this paper then is to provide the committee with an update on that 2024 Key Rural Issues publication. So members, in the paper then we've, I suppose, broken it down into the key topic headings from that publication. So the first one then is looking at population and education. And members will note that population growth in rural areas from 2001 to 2020 outstripped that in urban areas by a factor of almost 3 to 1, so 20% to 7%. And also notably there that young people from rural areas are more likely to leave school with 5 or more GCSEs at A star to C level. And school leavers in rural areas are more likely to enter further or higher education than their urban peers. In relation to employment and industry, members will note that rural people of working age are more likely to be in full-time employment and less likely to be economically inactive than those living in urban areas. We've also provided some information there around the urban-rural gap in public sector earnings, which has narrowed substantially, with average earnings in rural areas now exceeding those in urban areas, a trend which we've noticed there is also evident in the average private sector earnings. Some of the other key points we've pulled out there in terms of in 2024, more than half of Northern Ireland businesses were in rural areas, yet rural businesses accounted for less than a quarter of employees and just over a quarter of the total business turnover. In terms of tourism and connectivity, we've noted that rural workers were also much more likely to use their own transport to commute than those from urban areas, though this gap has narrowed. In 2021, workers from rural areas had an average commute almost double that of our urban-based workers, travelling an average of more than 600 miles more during the year to get to work. And we've noted there that the updated travel survey data is expected later this year, and obviously we'll provide that when it becomes available. In 2022, 6 of the top 10 most visited paid attractions in Northern Ireland were in rural areas. And you'll also note that broadband availability and speeds in rural areas continue to increase rapidly, with full fibre services available now to 86% of rural Northern Ireland households. That's in 2024. And just to note that in 2022, that was at 65%. In terms of health and well-being, people living in rural areas are consistently more likely to rate their happiness and life satisfaction is high, and their anxiety levels is low. And then we've also included some figures there around life expectancy in relation to rural areas. We've also included some figures in relation to crime and what those figures are in terms of rural areas versus our urban counterparts. In terms of poverty, housing and household income, members will note that similar proportions of urban and rural households are in relative poverty. So that's 19% urban and 16% rural, or absolute poverty, which is 16% urban and 11% rural. We've also noted in the report that rural children in 22-23 were less likely to experience absolute poverty than their urban counterparts. And we've also gone on then to note that levels of home ownership are higher in rural than in urban areas. So that's 83% compared to 67%, with house prices in rural areas continuing to outstrip those in towns and cities. Members at 2.3 then, section 2.3 of the report, you'll note then that we've said, given the importance of the publication to the Rural Affairs Subcommittee and previous advocacy, that the committee may wish to consider inviting DAERA statisticians or officials to present the key rural issues publication to the subcommittee at a future meeting. And I suppose this would really provide a fresh perspective on the data. And then I suppose it would also allow discussion on future plans for the publication, and allow members to promote the need for greater dissemination of information, and really to get an overview of how other bodies utilise this data that we've just summarised. So in terms of the report then, members, it's recommended the subcommittee notes the key rural issues 2024 update, and agrees to invite DAERA statisticians to present the key rural issues publication at a future subcommittee meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Sinead. I suppose for me, one of the stats that's not there and is glaringly missing is the amount of children from rural areas having completed third level education that don't come back. For me, I can't understand why they wouldn't have even considered that, because we all know that our people are more likely to lose young people once they complete their third level education. Bernard?
No, a lot of information there, Sinead, and thank you, and I'd be happy enough to propose.
Thank you. Alan, are you coming in there?
I'll second it. Okay. Yep.
All right. So we're at the end of the agenda, unless nobody raised any AOB with you, Alan?
No one had previously raised down with me, Chairman. No.
Okay, thank you. All right then, it's a great evening, and I'm heading off to the Impartial Gala. Rodney's treating me to a free dinner. I'll probably be in the paper next week how much I ate, but I'll try and get my money's worth out of it. So enjoy your evening, everybody. Thank you.
All right, thank you, mate.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
everyone.
much.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members.